welcome again. I believe this is our third or fourth week, third week with the Celestine Prophecy. We are on page 29 at the plane. Would anybody like to start?
I
Go ahead.
can
Oh,
I
go
can
ahead.
start it off. All right. The plane tilted forward and began its descent as the flight attendant announced that we would soon be landing in Lima. I gave Dobson the name of my hotel and asked where he was staying. He gave me the name of his hotel and said it was only a couple of miles from mine. "What's your plan?" I asked. "I've been thinking about that," he replied. "The first thing, I guess, is to visit the American embassy and tell them why I'm here, just for the record." "Good idea. After that, I'm going to speak with as many Peruvian scientists as I can. The scientists at the University of Lima have already told me that they have no knowledge of the manuscript, but there are other scientists who are working at various ruins who may be willing to talk. What about you? What are your plans?" "I have none," I replied. "Do you mind if I tag along?" "Not at all. I was going to suggest it." After the plane landed, we picked up our luggage and agreed to meet later at Dobson's hotel. I walked outside and hailed a taxi in the fading twilight. The air was dry and the wind very brisk. As my cab drove away, I noticed another taxi pull out quickly behind us, then lag behind in traffic. It stayed with us through several turns, and I could make out a lone figure in the back. A rush of nervousness filled my stomach. I asked the driver, who could speak English, not to go directly to the hotel, but to drive around for a while. I told him I was interested in sightseeing. He complied without comment. The taxi followed. What was this all about? When we arrived at my hotel, I told the driver to stay in the car. Then I opened my door and pretended to be paying the fare. The taxi following us pulled up to the curb some distance away, and the man stepped out and walked slowly toward the hotel entrance. I jumped back into the vehicle and shut the door, telling the cabbie to drive on. As we sped away, the man walked into the street and watched us until we were out of sight. I could see my driver's face in the rearview mirror. He was watching me closely, his expression tense. "Sorry about this," I said. "I've decided to change accommodations." I struggled to smile when then gave him the name of Dobson's Hotel, although part of me wanted to go straight to the airport and take the first plane back to the States. A
Mhm.
half block short of our destination, I had the driver pull over. "Wait here," I told him. "I'll be right back." The streets were filled with people, mostly native Peruvians, but here and there I passed some Americans and Europeans. Something about seeing the tourists made me feel safer. When I was within 50 yards of the hotel, I stopped. Something wasn't right. Suddenly, as I watched, gunshots rang out and screams filled the air. The crowd in front of me flung themselves to the ground, opening up my view down the sidewalk. Dobson was running toward me, wide-eyed, panicked. Figures behind him pursued. One fired his gun into the air and ordered Dobson to halt. As he ran closer, Dobson strained to focus and recognized me. "Run!" he yelled. "For God's sakes, run!" I turned and ran down an alley in terror. Ahead was a vertical board fence, 6 feet high, blocking my way. When I reached it, I leaped as high as I could, catching the top of the boards with my hands and flinging my right leg over the top. As I pulled my left leg over and dropped to the other side, I looked back down the alley. Dobson was running desperately. More shots were fired. He stumbled and fell. I continued to run blindly, leaping piles of trash and stacks of cardboard boxes. For a moment, I thought I heard footsteps behind me, but I didn't dare look back. Ahead, the alley ran into the next street, which was also crowded, with people seemingly unalarmed. As I entered the street, I dared a glance to my rear, my heart pounding. No one was there. I walked hurriedly down the sidewalk to the right, trying to fade into the crowd. Why did Dobson run? I asked myself. Was he killed? "Wait a minute," someone said in a loud whisper from behind my left shoulder. I started to run, but he reached and grabbed my arm. "Please, wait a minute," he said. "I saw what happened. I'm trying to help you." "Who are you?" I asked, trembling. "I'm Wilson James," he said. "I'll explain later. Right now, we have to get off these streets." Something about his voice and demeanor calmed my panic, so I decided to follow him. We walked up the street and into a leather goods store. He nodded to a man behind the counter and led me into a musty spare room in the back. He shut the door and closed the curtains. He was a man in his 60s, although he seemed much younger, a sparkle in his eyes or something. His skin was dark brown and his hair was black. He looked of Peruvian descent, but the English he spoke sounded almost American. He wore a bright blue t-shirt and jeans. "You'll be safe here for a while," he said. "Why are they chasing you?" I didn't respond. "You're here about the manuscript, aren't you?" he asked. "How did you know that?" "I guess the man with you was here for that reason too." "Yes, his name is Dobson." "How did you know there were two of us?" "I have a room over the alley. I was looking out the window as they were chasing you." "Did they shoot Dobson?" I asked, terrified of what I might hear in reply. "I don't know," he said. "I couldn't tell, but once I saw you had escaped, I ran down the back steps to head you off. I thought perhaps I could help." "Why?" For an instant, he looked at me as though he was uncertain how to answer my question. Then his expression changed to one of warmth. "You won't understand this, but I was standing there at the window and thoughts about an old friend came to me. He's dead now. He died because he thought people should know about the manuscript. When I saw what was happening in the alley, I felt I should help you." He was right. I didn't understand, but I had the feeling he was being absolutely truthful with me. I was about to ask another question when he spoke again. "We can talk about this later," he said. "I think we'd better move to a safer place." "Wait a minute, Wilson," I said. "I just want to find a way back to the States. How can I do this?" "Call me Will," he replied. "I don't think you should try the airport, not yet. If they're still looking for you, they'll be checking there. I have some friends who live out of town. They will hide you. There are several other ways out of the country you can choose. When you're ready, they will show you where to go." He opened the door to the room and checked inside the shop, then walked outside and checked the street. When he returned, he motioned for me to follow. We walked down the street to a blue Jeep that Will pointed out. As we got in, I noticed the back seat was carefully packed with food, stuffs, and tents and satchels as if for an extended trip. We rode in silence. I leaned back in the passenger seat and tried to think. My stomach was knotted in fear. I had never expected this. What if I had been arrested and thrown into a Peruvian jail or killed outright? I had to size up my situation. I had no clothes, but I did have money and one credit card, and for some reason, I trusted Will. "What had you and, who was it, Dobson, done to get those people after you?" Will asked suddenly. "Nothing that I know of," I replied. "I met Dobson on the plane. He's an historian, and he was coming down here to investigate the manuscript officially. He represents a group of other scientists." Will looked surprised. "Did the government know he was coming?" "Yes, he had written certain government officials that he wanted cooperation." "I can't believe they tried to arrest him. He didn't even have his copies with them." "He has copies of the manuscript?" "Only the first two insights." "I had no idea there were copies in the United States. Where did he get them?" "On an earlier trip, he was told a certain priest knew of the manuscript. He couldn't find him, but he found the copies hidden behind his house." Will looked sad. "Jose." "Who?" I asked. "He was the friend I told you about, the one who was killed. He was adamant that as many people as possible hear about the manuscript." "What happened to him?" "He was murdered. We don't know by whom. His body was found in the forest miles from his house, but I have to think it was his enemies." "The government?" "Certain people in the government or in the church." "His church would go that far?" "Perhaps. The church is secretly against the manuscript. There are a few priests who understand the document and advocate it covertly, but they must be very careful. Jose talked of it openly to anyone who wanted to know. I warned him for months before his death to be more subtle, to stop giving copies to anyone who came along. He told me he was doing what he knew he must." With that, I will pass.
Thank you, Jen. Welcome, Stacy.
Thank you. Thank you.
Hey,
Sorry for
Stacy.
jumping in a little bit late.
No, we're happy you're here.
Happy to be here. I will go if you guys are okay with it.
Top of page 30.
Yes.
34.
Uh,
When was the manuscript first discovered? I asked. It was first translated 3 years ago, but no one knows when it was first discovered. The original floated around for years, we think, among the Indians until it was found by Jose. He alone managed to get it translated, of course. Once the church found out what the manuscript said, they tried to suppress it totally. Now all we have are copies. We think they destroyed the original. Will had driven east out of town, and we were riding on a narrow 2-lane road through a heavily irrigated area. We passed several small plank dwellings and then a large pasture with expensive fencing. Did Dobson tell you about the first 2 insights? Will asked. He told me about the second insight, I replied. I have a friend who told me about the first. She talked to a priest at another time, to Jose, I guess. Do you understand these 2 insights? I think so. Do you understand that chance encounters often have a deeper meaning? It seems, I said, like the whole trip has been one coincidental event after another. That begins to happen once you become alert and connected with the energy. Connected, Will smiled. That's something mentioned further in the manuscript. I'd like to hear about it, I said. Let's talk about it later, he said, indicating with a nod that he was turning the vehicle onto a gravel driveway. 100 feet ahead was a modest wood frame house. Will pulled up beneath a large tree to the right of the house and stopped. My friend works for the owner of a large farming estate who owns much of the land in the area, he said, and provides this house. The man is very powerful and secretly supportive of the manuscript. You'll be safe here. A porch light flicked on, and a short, squat man who appeared to be a native Peruvian rushed out, smiling broadly and saying something enthusiastically in Spanish. When he reached the Jeep, he patted Will on the back through the open window and glanced pleasantly over at me. Will asked him to speak in English, then introduced us. He needs a little help, Will said to the man. He wants to return to the States, but he'll have to be very careful. I guess I'm going to leave him with you. The man was looking closely at Will. You're about to go after the 9th insight again, aren't you? He asked. Yes, Will said, getting out of the Jeep. I opened my door and walked around the vehicle. Will and his friend were strolling toward the house, having a conversation I couldn't hear. As I walked up, the man said, I will start the preparations, then walked away. Will turned to me. What did he mean? I asked. When he questioned you about the 9th insight. There is a part of the manuscript that has never been found. There were 8 insights with the original text, but one more insight, the 9th, was mentioned there. Many people have been searching for it. Do you know where it is? No, not really. Then how are you going to find it? Will smiled. The same way Jose found the original 8, the same way you found the first 2, and then ran into me. If one can connect and build up enough energy, the coincidental events begin to happen consistently. Tell me how to do that, I said. Which insight is it? Will looked at me as if assessing my level of understanding. How to connect is not just one insight, it's all of them. Remember, in the second insight, where it describes how explorers would be sent out into the world utilizing the scientific method to discover the meaning of human life on this planet, but they would not return right away? Yes. Well, the remainder of the insights represent the answers finally coming back, but they aren't just coming from institutional science. The answers I'm talking about are coming from many different areas of inquiry. The findings of physics, psychology, mysticism, and religion are all coming together into a new synthesis based on perception of coincidences. We're learning the details of what the coincidences mean, how they work, and as we do, we're constructing a whole new view of life, insight by insight. Then I want to hear about each insight, I said. Can you explain them to me before you go? I've found it doesn't work that way. You must discover each one of them in a different way. How? It just happens. It wouldn't work for me to just tell you. You might have the information about each of them, but you wouldn't have the insights. You would have to discover them in the course of your own life. We stared at each other in silence. Will smiled. Talking with him made me feel incredibly alive. Why are you going after the 9th insight now? I asked. It's the right time. I have been a guide here and I know the terrain and I understand all 8 insights. When I was at my window over the alley thinking of Jose, I had already decided to go north one more time. The 9th insight is out there. I know it, and I'm not getting any younger. Besides, I've envisioned myself finding it and achieving what it says. I know it is the most important of the insights. It puts all the others into perspective and gives the true purpose of life. He paused suddenly, looking serious. I would have left 30 minutes earlier, but I had this nagging feeling that I had forgotten something. He paused again. That's precisely when you showed up. We looked at each other for a long time. You think I'm supposed to go with you? I asked. What do you think? I don't know, I said, unsure of myself. I felt confused. The story of my Peruvian trip was flashing before my mind. Charlene, Dobson, now Will. I had come to Peru because of a mild curiosity, and now I found myself in hiding. An unwitting fugitive who didn't even know who his pursuers were. And the strangest thing of all was that at this moment, instead of being terrified, totally panicked, I found myself in a state of excitement. I should have been summoned, I should have been summoning all my wits and instincts to find a way home. But what I really wanted to do was to go with Will into what would undoubtedly be more danger. As I considered my options, I realized that in reality, I had no choice. The second insight had ended any possibility of going back to my old preoccupations. If I was going to stay aware, I had to go forward. I plan to spend the night, Will said. So you will have until tomorrow morning to decide. I've already decided, I told him. I want to go.
Hmm.
A matter.
Oh.
What you want to go?
Oh, go ahead.
A matter of energy. We rose at dawn and drove east all morning in virtual silence. Early on, Will had mentioned that we would drive straight across the Andes into what he called the High Selva, an area consisting of forest-covered foothills and plateaus. But he had said little else. I had asked him several questions about his background and about our destination, but he had politely put me off, indicating he wanted to concentrate on driving. Finally, I had stopped talking altogether and had focused instead on the scenery. The views of the mountain peaks were staggering. About noon, when we had reached the last of the towering ridges, we stopped at an overlook to eat a lunch of sandwiches in the Jeep and to gaze out at the wide barren valley ahead. On the other side of the valley were smaller foothills, green with plant life. As we ate, Will said we would spend the night at the Vicente Lodge, we'll just call it that, an old 19th century estate which formerly belonged to the Spanish Catholic Church. Vicente was now owned by a friend of his, he explained, and was operated as a resort specializing in business and scientific conferences. With only the brief explanation, we departed and rode silently again. An hour later, we arrived at Vicente. Am I saying that right? Does anybody have a better Vicente?
It's Vicente.
Vicente.
Yeah.
Vicenta. Vicenta.
Vicente. So like,
Vicente. Yes.
yeah,
Got
there
it.
you go.
Thank you. Vicente. Entering the property through a large iron and stone gate and proceeding northeast up a narrow gravel drive, once more I asked a few probing questions. Vicente and why we were here, but as he had done earlier, Will brushed aside my inquiries. Only this time he suggested outright that I focus on the landscape. Immediately, the beauty of Vicente touched me. We were surrounded by colorful pastures and orchards, and the grass seemed unusually green and healthy. It grew thickly even under the giant oaks that rose up every 100 feet or so throughout the pastures. Something about these huge trees seemed incredibly attractive, but I couldn't quite grasp what. After about a mile, the road bent east and up a slight rise. At the top of the knoll was a lodge, a large Spanish-style building constructed of hewn timbers and gray stone. The structure appeared to contain at least 50 rooms, a large screen porch, and covered the entire south wall. The yard around the lodge was marked by more gigantic oaks and contained beds of exotic plants and walkways trimmed with dazzling flowers and ferns. Groups of people talked idly on the porch and among the trees. As we got out of the vehicle, Will lingered a moment and gazed out at the view. Beyond the lodge to the east, the land sloped gradually downward, then flattened out into meadows and forests. Another range of foothills appeared, bluish purple in the distance. I think I'll go in and make sure they have room for us, Will said. Why don't you spend some time looking around? You're going to like this place. No kidding, I said. As he walked away, he turned and looked at me. Be sure to check out the research gardens. I'll see you at dinner time. Will was obviously leaving me alone for some reason, but I didn't care why. I felt great and not the least bit apprehensive. Will had already told me that because of the substantial tourist dollar Vicente brought into the country, the government had always taken a hands-off approach to the place, even though the manuscript was often discussed here. Several large trees and a winding path toward the south attracted me, so I walked that way. Once I reached the trees, I could see that the walkway proceeded through a small iron gate and down several tiers of stone steps to a meadow filled with wildflowers. In the distance was an orchard of some kind and a small creek and more forest land. At the gate, I stopped and took several deep breaths, admiring the beauty below. I will pass.
Thank you. I'll go ahead and read. It's certainly lovely, isn't it? A voice from behind asked. I turned quickly. A woman in her late 30s carrying a hiking pack stood behind me. It certainly is, I said. I've never seen anything quite like it. For a moment, we looked out at the fields and at the cascading tropical plants that terraced beds, or plants in the terrace beds on each side of us. Then I asked, do you happen to know where the research gardens are? Sure, she said. I'm heading that way now. I'll show you. After introducing ourselves, we walked down the steps and into a well-worn path heading south. Her name was Sarah Lorner, and she was sandy-haired and blue-eyed and could have been described as girlish, except for her serious demeanor. We walked for several minutes in silence. Is this your first visit here? She asked. Yes, it is, I replied. I don't know much about the place. Well, I've been here on and off for almost a year now, and I can fill you in a bit. About 20 years ago, this estate became popular as a sort of international scientific hangout. Various scientific organizations had their meetings here, biologists and psychiatrists mainly. A few years ago, she hesitated for an instant and looked at me. Have you heard of the manuscript that was discovered here in Peru? Yes, I have, I said. I heard about the first two insights. I wanted to tell her how fascinated I was with the document, but I held back, wondering whether to trust her completely. I thought maybe that was the case, she said. It looked as if you were picking up on the energy here. We were crossing a wooden bridge which traversed the creek. What energy? I asked. She stopped and leaned back against the railing of the bridge. Do you know anything about the third insight? Nothing. It describes a new understanding of the physical world. It says we humans learned to perceive what was formerly an invisible type of energy. The lodge had become a gathering place for those scientists interested in studying and talking about this phenomenon. Then scientists think this energy is real? I asked. She was turning to walk across the bridge. Only a few, she said, and we take some heat for it. You're a scientist then. I teach physics at a small college in Maine. So why are some scientists disagreeing with you? She was silent for a moment, as if in thought. You have to understand the history of science, she said, glancing at me as if to ask whether I wanted to get deeper into the subject. I nodded for her to proceed. Think about the second insight for a moment. After the fall of the medieval worldview, we in the West were suddenly became aware that we lived in a totally unknown universe. In attempting to understand the nature of this universe, we knew we had to somehow separate fact from superstition. In this regard, we scientists assumed a particular attitude known as scientific skepticism, which in effect demands solid evidence for any new assertion of how the world works. Before we would believe anything, we wanted evidence that could be seen and grabbed with the hands. Any idea that couldn't be proved in some physical way was systematically rejected. God knows, she continued, this attitude served us well with the more obvious phenomena in nature, which objects such as rocks and bodies and trees, objects everyone can perceive no matter how skeptical they are. We quickly went out and named every part of the physical world, attempting to discover why the universe operated as it did. We finally concluded that everything that occurs in nature does so according to some natural law, that each event has a direct physical and understandable cause. She smiled knowingly. You see, in many ways, scientists have not been that different from others in our time period. We decided along with everyone else to master this place in which we found ourselves. The idea was to create an understanding of the universe that made the world seem safe and manageable. And the skeptical attitude kept us focusing on concrete problems that would make our existence seem more secure. We had followed the meandering path from the bridge through a small meadow and into an area more densely covered with trees. And I'll pass that everybody can get a chance to read, if you would like to. Oh, I think you're on.
You can't hear me. Yeah, I lost where we were at. I'm sorry. I had stuff going on with my son.
Oh, the top of 42. I can continue if you want.
I just need to find where we are.
Paragraph on 42. With this attitude.
What?
On page 42, the top paragraph.
Oh yeah, there you go. Okay, sorry. With this attitude, she went on. Science systematically removed the uncertain esoteric from the world. We concluded, following the thinking of Isaac Newton, that the universe always operated in a predictable manner, like an enormous machine, because for a long time, that's all it could be proved to be. Events which happened simultaneously to other events, yet had no causal relationship, were said to occur only by chance. Then 2 investigations occurred which opened our eyes again to the mystery in the universe. Much has been written over the past several decades about the revolution in physics, but the changes really stem from 2 major findings, those of quantum mechanics and those of Albert Einstein. The whole of Einstein's life's work was to show that we perceive as hard matter is mostly empty space with a pattern of energy running through it. This includes ourselves. And what quantum physics has shown is that when we look at these patterns of energy at smaller and smaller levels, startling results can be seen. Experiments have revealed that when you break apart small aspects of this energy, what we call elementary particles, and try to observe how they operate, the act of observation itself alters the results, as if these elementary particles are influenced by what the experimenter expects. This is true even if the particles must appear in places they couldn't possibly go. Given the laws of the universe as we know them, 2 places at the same moment, forward or backward in time, that sort of thing. She stopped to face me again. In other words, the basic stuff of the universe at its core is looking like a kind of pure energy that is malleable to human intention and expectation in a way that defies our old mechanistic model of the universe, as though our expectation itself causes our energy to flow out into the world and affect other energy systems, which of course is exactly what the third insight would lead us to believe. She shook her head. Unfortunately, most scientists don't take this idea seriously. They would rather remain skeptical and wait to see if we can prove it. Hey, Sarah, here we are over here, a voice called faintly from a distance. To the right, about 50 yards through the trees, we could see someone waving. Sarah looked at me. I need to go talk with you guys for a few minutes. I have a translation of the third insight with me. If you would like to pick out a spot and read some of it while I'm gone. I sure would, I said. She pulled a folder from her pack, handed it to me, and walked away. I took the folder and looked around for a place to sit down. Here the forest floor was dense with small bushes and was slightly soggy, but to the east the land rose toward what looks like another knoll. I decided to walk in that direction in search of dry ground. At the top of the rise I was awestruck. It was another spot of incredible beauty. The gnarled oaks were spaced about 50 feet apart, and their wide limbs grew completely together at the top, creating a canopy overhead. On the forest floor grew broad-leaved tropical plants, which stood 4 or 5 feet high and had leaves up to 10 inches in width. These plants were interspersed with large ferns and bushes flush with white flowers. I picked out a dry place and sat down. I could smell the musty odor of the leaves and the fragrance of the blossoms. I opened the folder and turned to the beginning of the translation. A brief introduction explained that the third insight brings a transformed understanding of the physical universe. Its words clearly echoed Sarah's summary. Sometime near the end of the second millennium, it predicted humans would discover a new energy which formed the basis of and radiated outward from all things, including ourselves. I pondered that idea for a moment, then read something that fascinated me. The manuscript said that the human perception of this energy first begins with a heightened sensitivity to beauty. As I thought about this, the sound of someone walking along the path drew my attention. I saw Sarah at the exact moment she looked toward the knoll and spotted me. This place is great, she said when she reached me. Have you come to the part about the perception of beauty yet? Yes, I said, but I'm not sure what that means. Further in the manuscript, she said. It goes into more detail but I'll explain it briefly. The perception of beauty is kind of a barometer telling each of us how close we are to actually perceiving the energy. This is clear because once you observe this energy, you realize it's on the same continuum as beauty. You sound like you see it, I said. She looked at me without the slightest self-consciousness. Yes, I do. But the first thing I developed was a deeper appreciation of beauty. But how does that work? Isn't beauty relative? She shook her head. The thing that we perceive as beautiful may be different, but the actual characteristics we ascribe to beautiful objects are similar. Think about it. When something strikes us as beautiful, it displays more presence and sharpness of shape and vividness of color, doesn't it? It stands out. It shines. It seems almost iridescent compared to the dullness of other objects less attractive. I nodded. Look at this spot, she continued. I know you are blown away by it because we all are. This place leaps out at you. The colors and shapes seem magnified. Well, the next level of perception is to see an energy field hovering about everything. I must have looked bewildered because she laughed. Then she said very seriously, perhaps we should walk on to the gardens. They're about a half a mile farther south. I think you'll find them interesting. I thanked her for taking the time to explain the manuscript to me, a total stranger, and for showing me around Vicente. She shrugged her shoulders. You seem like a person friendly to what we're trying to do, she said. And we all know we're involved in a public relations effort here. For this research to continue, we must get the word out in the United States and elsewhere. The local authorities didn't seem to like us much. Suddenly, a voice called out from behind me. Excuse me, please. We turned to see 3 men walking quickly up the path toward us. All appeared to be in their late 40s and were dressed in stylish clothes. Would one of you tell me where the research gardens are? The taller of the three asked. Could you tell me what your business here is? Sarah asked in return. My colleagues and I have permission from the owner of this estate to examine the gardens and to speak with someone about the so-called research being conducted here. We are from the University of Peru. Sounds as though you're not in agreement with our findings, she said, smiling, obviously trying to lighten the situation. Absolutely not, another of the men said. We think it's preposterous to claim that some mysterious energy can now be seen when it has never been observed before. Have you tried to see it? Sarah queried. The man ignored the question and asked again. Can you direct us to the gardens? Of course, Sarah said. About 100 yards ahead, you'll see a path turning east. Take it and ahead maybe a quarter of a mile, you'll run into them. Thank you, the tall man said as they hurried on their way. You sent them in the wrong direction, I said. Not really, she replied. There are other gardens in that area, and the people there are more prepared to talk with these kind of skeptics. We get people like this through here occasionally, and not just scientists, but curiosity seekers as well. People who can't begin to grasp what we're doing, which points out the problem that exists in scientific understanding. What do you mean? As I said before, the old skeptical attitude was great when exploring the more visible and obvious phenomenon in the universe, such as trees or sunshine and thunderstorms. But there's another group of observable phenomena, more subtle, that you can't study. In fact, you can't even tell that they're there at all, unless you suspend or bracket your skepticism and try every way possible to perceive them. Once you can, then you can return to your rigorous study. Interesting, I said. Ahead, the woods ended, and I could see dozens of cultivated plots, each one growing in a different type plant. Most seemed to be food-bearing types, everything from bananas to spinach. At the eastern border of each crop was a wide gravel path which ran north to what appeared to be a public road. 3 metal outbuildings were spaced along the path. 4 or 5 people worked near each one. I see friends of mine, Sarah said, and pointed toward the closest building. Let's go over there. I'd like for you to meet them. Sarah introduced me to 3 men and 1 woman, all of whom were involved in the research. The men spoke with me briefly, then excused themselves to continue their work, but the woman, a biologist named Marjorie, seemed free to talk. I caught Marjorie's eye. What exactly are you researching here? I asked. She appeared to be taken off guard, but smiled and finally answered. It's hard to know where to start, she said. Are you familiar with the manuscript? The first sections of it, I comment. I just begun the 3rd insight. Well, that's what we're all about here. Come on, I'll show you. She motioned for me to follow her, and we walked around the metal building to a plot of beans. I noticed they appeared to be exceptionally healthy, with no noticeable insect damage or dead leaves. The plants were growing in what appeared to be a highly humus, almost fluffy soil, and each plant was carefully spaced, the stems and leaves of one growing near but never touching those of the next. She pointed to the closest plant. We've tried to look at these plants as total energy systems and think of everything they need to flourish: soil, nutrients, moisture, light. What we have found is that the total ecosystem around each plant is really one living system, one organism, and the plants of each of the parts impacts on the health of the whole. She hesitated, then said, the basic point is that once we start thinking about the energy relationships all around the plant, then we started seeing amazing results. The plants in our studies were not particularly larger, but according to nutritional criteria, they were more potent. How was that measured? They contained more protein, carbohydrates, vitamins, minerals. She looked at me expectantly. But that wasn't the most amazing thing. We found that the plants which had the most direct human attention were even more potent. What kind of attention? I asked. You know, she said, fiddling with the ground around them, checking them every day, that sort of thing. We set up an experiment with a control group, some getting special attention, others not, and the findings was confirmed. What's more, she continued, we expanded the concept and had a researcher not just give them attention, but to mentally ask them to grow stronger. The person would sit with them and focus all his attention and concern on their growth. Did they grow stronger? By significant amounts, and they also grew faster. That's incredible. Yes, it is. Her voice trailed off as she watched an older man appearing to be in his 60s walk toward us. The gentleman approaching us is a micronutritionist, she said discreetly. He came down here about a year ago for the first time and immediately took a leave of absence from Washington State University. His name is Professor Haynes. He's done some great studies. As he arrived, I was introduced. He was a strong-built man with black hair, gray streaks at his temples. After some prodding from Marjorie, the professor began to summarize his research. He was most interested, he told me, in the functioning of the body's organs as measured by highly sensitive blood types, especially as this functioning related to the quality of food eaten. And I'll pass.
I think we need to stop. Read ourselves out of time. We got 15 minutes left, so let's go ahead and just open it up to discuss. Let me mark where we're at, though.
It's been really fascinating reading this book again, like from having read it like when I was so young. When I was probably around 16 the first time I read it. So I fast forward more years than I want to admit. I've learned so much more and have been open and exposed to so much more that I remember really being blown away with this whole part that I just read about the plants and everything and the third insight, like that really blew my mind. And I didn't even know how it was possible. And I reading it again, it all makes so much sense. I read this book, A Science of a New Heaven, that talks about all of the stuff that goes behind it, everything like that. And it's really cool. So it's really fun.
It is super neat. This last few days, being so down in the, energetically and just working through whatever this is running through my body, just really, and then the last few months, especially delving deep into this fasting and juicing and really harmonizing my relationship with food and then allowing that to play out into how I eat, the intention I have, how much I eat, all of those things, and the shift in the energetics from choosing to buy organic, from choosing to eat more alive food instead of processed and canned and things like that, making my own soups or making my own juice, or it's just been such a vast, immense change and shift just from the different choices in that, because now it feels like I'm working with the food as opposed to I don't even know what I was doing before, but it wasn't working with the food. It wasn't dancing with it. It wasn't harmonizing with it at all.
That makes a lot of sense. And I think you should share your lentil soup recipe.
It's on the chat. It's in the community.
Oh, good. It's already there. Yay. I'm gonna have to look.
Yeah, just go to the food as medicine space.
Oh, cool.
And then it's there.
I need to explore more. So
yeah,
all these things I didn't know there last week's meeting, and it's super everything.
It's a gift that keeps on giving.
There's a lot of studies on food or on plants and on life when it's grown and with human interaction or with music or with just even writing. There was what was that? I'm drawing a blank now.
Matsumoto. Yeah, with the water
crystals and that.
Yeah.
So I've seen studies on even the differences of jazz music compared to metal and how energy creates the food we need. And I mean, it's just evidence of why the Dust Bowl happened, right? We just mass produce everything, destroy the ground just to get more crops. They say that the food we're eating now is 70% less nutrition than it was back in the 50s. because we've just destroyed it and we've taken all the energy from it. We're not producing it with energy. I'm so excited. I just got a one of these little boxes. It's just a little hydroponic indoor grower. So I'm gonna start growing my own. I got some tomatoes and some lettuce and some basil that I'm gonna start growing at home, and bet your ass I'm gonna give that some love, and see how these tomatoes turn out. I mean, I think it's a cool little experiment, and I'd love to start feeding myself. I think we could do that.
Well, and in a lot of cultures throughout the world, cooking and feeding loved ones or friends of loved ones is an act of love. Like they do truly believe that the intention that they cook with, no matter actually what they're cooking, how nutritious or maybe it's, something a little bit more um I can't think of the word right now, but like whether it's nutritious or just something, a dessert or whatever it is that they're going to share, it's the intention that they're putting into it and that love that they're giving it, that energy goes into, who's eating it and who they're feeding. And I think that's a whole nother issue of how we're doing agriculture here and animals and just putting a bunch of pigs in a place where they don't have any room to move around and that kind of thing. All of that stress and things go into the food that we eat. So yeah, it's interesting, Jen, that you started with food, but it's a very good example of what they're talking about.
Yeah.
Yeah, you said that. So I have I'm gonna put it somewhere in the community, but there's a local house cleaning company that it's called Eco Mama Green Clean. And it's all the owner. I know the owner, she's a good friend of mine, and she made all of the products that they use. And you can buy just the products or you can hire them to clean your house. But I have I have their lavender scented or not lavender scented, it's actual lavender just household cleaner. And when you look at the ingredients list, the first ingredient is always love.
Yeah. That's awesome.
Oh, yeah, I love that.
Oh,
There's a
Yeah.
lady, I get tea when I have my coffee shop, and she's still at the farmer's market, but she does tea and olive oil and chocolates, and she makes it all from scratch and sells it. And the same thing, the first ingredient on every one of her packages is love.
Yep.
Yeah.
I love
Tea. But I think that's another key factor in our health is like shopping at the local street fairs, at the farmers market. It's it's just been such a I love that you pointed that out, Jen, just that concept of shifting to organic, shifting to healthier foods, shifting to more energetically taken care of.
Yeah. And then not even just that, but go to the farmers markets and then cultivate a relationship with the farmer. Cultivate a relationship with the people that are growing the food that you're buying and ingesting. And then not only do you have this love for the food that you're eating, or whether you pray over the food that you're eating, or whatever you do, but then you have this energetic connection, this love connection with the people who are cultivating your food, even though they may not be the one specifically cultivating. If they're the ones that are out selling it, that's probably where they are. But then that connection then goes out into the people that are cultivating your food, and then you can create that, like, and not only that, but then getting to know a farmer, getting to understand what it's like to genuinely truly be a farmer, and to understand like the difficulty that they've had to go through. Like it's just the things that I've been learning lately is just so eye-opening, and how much like when we have these major food chains, like grocery stores, even the Sprouts, you know, even the Whole Foods, even those things, it takes away from the gratitude that could be amplified when we get to know the system and get to know the actual process of how the food is grown and what they do. Like, let's go visit, let's take a field trip and visit a farm, like for real. And let's locate a local farmer and donate, like have a function or donate a portion of our income to the farmers to help them, you know. There's just like so much that the major chain grocery stores takes out of our line of sight, and in turn that takes away from some of that amplification of the gratitude that we could have, of the understanding that we have, of the compassion that we could have, instead of, you know, oh, it's so expensive, or oh my gosh, it's just whatever. Like, let's take a look and like what's going on down the food chain, and then we can even take it a step back, right? And if we really want to dig down deep and say, yeah, you know what, I'm willing to pay fucking $12 for my watermelon at the goddamn farmers market, as opposed to $4.99 for this watermelon, because I don't want to support slave labor.
Right.
I do not want to support having jobs farmed out to people that are getting paid nothing, nothing. And that's happening here in the States. Like, really being intentional in choosing where our dollars are going and what it is that we're supporting. And this is coming from a single mom who, like, again, I am a fucking student of all of this. Like, I am just now learning. But coming from a single mom who, I didn't have a choice.
Right.
I had to fucking buy macaroni and cheese because I didn't know how I was going to pay my bills. Right. And it came from like one tiny step at a time. Tiny step. Oh, my friend made homemade soap. Okay, I'm going to go and spend $5 on a bar of soap when I could go spend $1 at the dollar store. But I'm going to spend $5 on the soap that she made because I know her and I want to support her. And I love the fucking smell. And it makes my skin beautiful. I don't need anything else, you know? But yeah, just it goes so deep, right? And there's so much. And like what you were saying, Laura, I was the same. I read this book when I was 19. And now, 20 years later, like, these aren't just fanciful dream states, fantasies that I knew could be real, right? And this kind of validated their reality, but now I'm living these things.
Yeah.
And it's just so neat to kind of go from one end to the other.
I really like listening to you talk that whole process out, because sometimes I have struggled with the money aspect, like, you know, wanting, cause, and I'm lucky because I'm on the East Valley, but in when a farmer market's not open, we have Main Street Market on Main, and like so like they have a lot of local farmer stuff there and local goods and everything, and uh and but sometimes like some of the prices, sometimes it's like ouch, you know, when you could just go to Sprouts and get it for half the price or whatnot. But what you just were talking about wasn't just going to a store to get an item. You're talking about a whole experience and these other benefits that you get out of the product, not just like a utilitarian thing, you know. And the investment and the benefit of it, like you get so much more value of it, that it does so much more than what else you would buy, which is really cool when you illustrate it like that so beautifully.
Mm.
the other thought, the book, like Water for Chocolate, and there's also a movie. If you haven't read it or seen it, you should. It's all about intention. It's so good. It's a beautiful, and the movie is awesome, but the book is amazing. It's by Laura Esquivel, but
Can you tell me the name again?
yeah, like Water for Chocolate. It's by a Mexican author, and it's very rich in the Latin American culture and everything, and just the love that it, like the emotions put into the food and the effect it has on the family is really cool. Like it's a crazy
Yeah.
stuff, but it's fun. I want to watch it with my son now this weekend. But it's
Oh, that sounds beautiful. Yeah, it's definitely happening. And Stacey, like what you were saying about like it doesn't matter what the food is. It can be healthy or it can be chock full of sugar and like put you in a diabetic coma. It doesn't matter what the food is, it's the intention behind it. And that too is so freaking important because like over these last few months of my fasting journey, like realizing that I didn't have any conscious intention behind my eating. And then when I brought awareness to it, it was all meant to suppress my feelings or oppress my emotions or whatever the case may be. And being able to see that fucking sucked and it's still a process. However, it gave me the opportunity to be like, to choose what my intention is. And then, like, it's just growing even more. But, like, you know, it's one thing, like what you were saying, Stacey, about putting that intention, that love, that celebration behind creating the food and creating the experience. And this is for love. But then there's also the other side of that in this Western fast-paced culture where it's like, oh, we're celebrating. Here, we're going to eat that. Oh, you're sad. Here, have a pint of ice cream. Oh, you're heartbroken. Here, let's have a box of, let's have a thing of fudge. Or, oh, I love you. Here's a box of chocolates. All of these different things where it's not the intention anymore. It's so automatic just to turn to that, just to turn to the food. And that's not to say, like, I mean, I love me a box of chocolates just like everybody else. I love me with, brownie. Brownie bites are my favorite. Just throw that out there. However, that doesn't mean that that's the answer for everything, right? And to really, really allow yourself that intention. That's why I love to give like my lentil soup away because like that truly is like I have so much love that goes into that lentil soup. And then it makes my heart so full and happy when I give it to Paul and when I give it to Des and I have my little mason jars and like, here you go. And then it becomes this like, reciprocity thing because then they'll give me back the mason jars and I'll give them more soup. And then it's, just back and forth. And it's this just beautiful, like that is that intention of what you were talking about of like there's so much love in this and I know you guys love the soup and it nourishes you and it nourishes me to make it for you and to give it to you, and so it's just nourishment all the way around.
And it's communal is the other
Yeah.
part of it. Which goes back into what they were saying in the book about, the plants that had more attention, more touch, more, even before the words or whatever. So, food is another one of those things that, in a lot of parts of the world, it is also about community. It's about gathering. It's about being together. It's not just buying a box of chocolates from Walmart and saying, here, I love you, because it's in the shape of a heart and it's
Right.
February 14th. It is all about intention. And Jen, I loved what you were saying about the relationships with the farmers. I was listening to a podcast the other day with someone who's a doctor who's closely aligned with the Heart Math Institute, and he was talking about how even one step away from food, really big chains are everywhere. So he's like in his 60s and he's been wearing cowboy boots since he was like 6 years old. And he used to be able to walk into a mom and pop shop when he needed to get his heels fixed, and it would take 20 minutes for them to do it. And while he was waiting, he would be having a conversation with them about how their kids are doing or how their grandkids are doing, or and just how, especially after the pandemic, so many of those, stores that people put their souls and their hearts into, because that's what they wanted to do and give to people, no matter what the product or service was, have now been bought out by Targets and Walmarts, and everything's almost a monopoly, where Laura, like you were saying, now it's just become a utility. It's utilitarian. You go in to buy these paper towels because you need that, and there's no energy with it whatsoever. So it's a very interesting place that we're in, time that we're living in.
Have you
Part is we can make those shifts individually, and it just dominoes out. Jen's passion with the soup, it just comes into my house, and then it gets fed back out, and anything I have that it's this reciprocity. That's the best word I think that was used. That we have the impact to make this change, and I think it's happening around us in every direction. If now that my eyes are open to this, I see the movement away from this corporate greed that kind of got created in the last couple decades.
have you noticed that, or it's not just only like like what we go for services is more utilitarian, but also like people, the way they interact with a lot of people, seems to be a lot more impersonal, a lot more utilitarian. It's like I cherish this time so much to connect with people and have real conversation and have an exchange and have some reciprocity going on, to the exchange and everything. It's like it's invigorating, but it's like I was talking to this guy that works at ASU doing the same thing that I do, and we've collaborated over the years, and it's very one-sided conversations, very just very focused on very utilitarian things, and it's just kind of like there's no it's fascinating.
It lacks substance.
Yes.
Yeah.
And this is where we get to like embody that phrase of be the change. And so like one thing I wanted to point on real quick is like, Paul, like what you're doing. You're trying out something small with growing your own food. Like these are those ways that we can create those changes. And it's little steps, and it's not one big giant thing. It's just a culmination of small steps, one after the other after the other. And then what that ends up doing, and then with the whole utilitarian aspect of it and the chain stores buying up things, if we like, because I'm seeing it in the property management industry also. However, it's very short lived, because what ends up happening is things like this craving for this genuine connection, right? For having these real conversations with real people, not people that are getting paid, again, cents on the dollar to do a job, and they can't do it well. We can't understand them. And that's not anything to say bad about them. It's about them trying to send out work to pay people nothing to do the job that you can pay people here to do. Anyway, that's a whole other subject. However, being the change is being the one. You want to have a substance driven conversation? Great. Then start that substance driven conversation. It's amazing what happens when we give people the permission slip to do it. right? My day job is in property management, not just property management, but HOAs. Nobody likes their HOA. Nobody likes their fucking HOA. However, with me and my team, our goal is to genuinely change the way HOA is done, taking it back to the purpose it's meant to be, which is to support the homeowners in that community, to create a beautiful community, to create a supported community, to create a safe community, right? And so what do? I go and I have these types of conversations with the homeowners that end up calling me, or I simply hold space. Like, how can I serve? How am I meant to serve right now? And sometimes it's having these amazing conversations. And other times it's holding space for somebody for 15 minutes while they bitch at me about how fucking awful everything in their life is and blaming it on the HOA until they take a breath and they're like, oh my gosh, thank you so much for holding that space, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or whatever the case may be, right? It's being that which is needed, not being what you think you should be.
Oh, I show up to do electric at your house, and I had some dude reciting me a poem on Friday. Like it's just because when
Yeah.
you have that, you just make that connection. I'm there to do a job, sure, but there's more to it. I build that relationship. I
Yeah.
have that communication, and yeah, it's kind of cool.
Yeah. And it's like when we acquired this new company, it's like, okay, this team, these are the new people that I'm meant to serve. How can I serve them? These new lot of homeowners, these 12,000 homeowners that we just acquired are the new people that I am meant to serve. How can I serve them? Right. And so walking into the day, like, God, show me how deeply I can serve. Show me how I can serve today. And then going in with that mindset, that intention that I'm being of service. And then all of a sudden, sweeping the floor is being of service. Holding space is being of service. Cleaning the fucking toilet is being of service. Cleaning the goddamn dishes because my kids didn't do it last night is being of service.
Mm.
And it shifts that intention, right? You're still doing the same shit, but it means a whole lot fucking more.
I love that this
And
is what
that,
third insight.
Mhm.
Great call.
yeah,
Right on.
Oh, how fun. I'm so happy to have everybody here. Ah, it makes me so happy.
yes, absolutely. This has been awesome.
It was a
Mhm.
great read. Anybody have anything else, real quick?
Just nice to meet you, Stacy. Bye.
Nice to meet you too, Laura.
Right on. Well, thank you again for another great read of the Celestine Prophecy. We will start up again at 6:30 next Wednesday. Please welcome people to join us. We can fill this room up. It would be amazing. As well as if anybody wants to catch up and look back, it's all on the on the book club. I think it's just titled Book Club in the Sacred Wild.
So yeah, in the book club area, if you want to catch the replay, you can go to the replay section of the book club space. You can also find it on the Sacred Wild YouTube channel under the book clubs. There's a book club that has a copy or has the replays of all the book clubs that we have had so far. Our last book was The Alchemist, so you can rewatch that if you'd like. And then we also have Integration Circle. It's not going to be happening this coming Friday, but we do have Integration Circle every Friday at 6:30. We also have a Gene Keys gathering every Wednesday at it's at 11:22 Phoenix time, but 2:22
Eastern.
Eastern. Yeah, Eastern is the Sacred Wild sister who holds that gathering. That also, we have the replays of that every week posted as well. If you aren't familiar with the Gene Keys, you can go search that at genekeys.com and be prepared to have your entire world changed. And so, yeah, Sheena holds that as well. And then we are diligently working to get the creation of the Sacred Wild Mystery School, which will be going live spring equinox of next year. Yeah.
Beautiful.
Awesome, guys. Oh, thank you so much for coming. I love you guys. Mwah.
Yeah, love y'all too.
Thank you, everybody. Love y'all.
Yeah, have a great week.